What's going on, everybody? This morning, our conversation is going to be surrounding engineering. So, when a person, an engineer, designs a product, they look at lots of different things around that product, right? So, um, when people have various ideas about how they think things work, um, they can be incorrect if they don't have a proper understanding of engineering. And that is no fault of anybody, really. It's just whatever you're educated in, right? If you're a psychologist, chances are you might not totally understand the theory of relativity and how it applies to the tensile strength of a bolt at a certain high temperature. Or, I don't know, like anything like that. So, and not everybody does. It's just kind of, we all know different stuff. Okay. But I think what happens a lot of times is guitar players make assumptions about engineering based on maybe a feeling or based on history of what they've heard. When in actuality, or what they may do is this happens a lot. And again, this is not like it's just it's human nature. But I want to point it out so that it sort of gives you hopefully a little bit of a perspective change when you're looking at things, like when you're looking at a guitar, when you're looking at some gear. A lot of times what will happen is the misapplication of a product or a concept of engineering as how it applies to a guitar will cause a myth. And then the myth stays around long enough to cause a belief. And then a belief will stay around long enough to cause like an untruth that will literally affect the development of a product over time. So what you'll have is, this is incorrect. It's just flat wrong. But since everybody believes it, it's the common thing in guitar stuff. It happens all the time. And when you look at it at the fundamental of it, it's just summarily wrong. Okay. I'll give you a couple examples. And again, I'm not attacking anybody here, but I like to set things straight because what I don't want to do. Okay. So this is an interesting misconception that I'm afraid to be wrong. Okay. So no, we all need to be wrong. Otherwise we never learn anything. If you know that's a simple thing. So, but I try to do my best to be as accurate as possible because you're trying to present information to other people. And what I don't want to do is like perpetuate myths and inaccuracies. Okay. So this is why I really care about this. Okay. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. This is a comment. So I have this thing that I do in videos where I'll take wire cutters, guitar string cutters. You've seen me do it, and I'll cut the strings, and instead of detensioning the guitar, I do that because doing it doesn't hurt anything, and it's a hilarious way to myth bust, and it's a little shocking and it's kind of funny. Okay, and I always say this thing used to be a tree. Okay, so it can take it. Right? It can take windstorms. It can take lots of stuff. So a couple of pounds of tension change isn't going to hurt anything. Okay. So guitar strings aren't just trees. They're wood plus glue plus joints plus truss rod under constant load. Cutting all 6 strings at full tension seems like introducing a sudden force changes versus letting the neck relax gradually. So let's look at this from an engineering standpoint. So we've got a truss rod, we've got glue, and we've got joints, which are also glue. Okay, your neck joint is bolts. So let's get that out of the way. You know, a 16 penny nail has like an 800 pound shear strength, right? So if you've got 4 bolts, screws holding it into the wood, you're good there, right? You're not gonna break any of that stuff. So, oh, 8 o'clock. The tensile strength. What is the tensile strength of a truss rod? 1/4 inch by 1/2 inch, which is pretty close to what most of the modern dual action truss rods are. The torsion strength before it deforms and doesn't do what it's supposed to do is about 4,500 pounds. Okay, when you look at it from an engineering standpoint, basically meaning that thing, you can't hurt a truss rod in a guitar with any of the basic motions that you're going to do. In fact, if you break a guitar, if you actually stomp on a neck, chances are you're going to break the wood and the truss rod's going to come out in one piece, and it's probably not even going to be bent. I've tried this. Okay, so what about glue? Any glue joints? What is the strength of Titebond 3, which is the most common glue in guitar joints? It's about 4,000 pounds per square inch. And the failure rate of it is when you try to break a joint that is an inch between 2 hardwoods, typically the wood will fail 57% of the time. At 4,000 pounds, the wood will come apart before the glue joint does. At 4,000 pounds. Okay? So, all right. So, now, what is the average string tension on a guitar? Typically on an electric guitar with 10s on it, you're looking at about between 100 and, depending on the set, you're looking at about 115 to 130. It could be, if you have a very heavy set of strings, up to about 160 pounds. So when you cut an individual string, if you break a string, okay, if this theory were true from an engineering standpoint, it would be dangerous to your guitar to break a string. But you're really only introducing whatever the tension loss of that individual string is. So that are 5-8 pounds, right? Now these numbers dwarf that, right? From an engineering standpoint. Now, if we break them all at the same time, we're only the max shock of 160 pounds with 12s or 13s on it. You will never, the only damage you could ever do to your guitar by doing this from an engineering standpoint is scratch it. You could scratch it, I suppose, right? If your bridge flies off or a string goes somewhere, right? But from an engineering standpoint, this whole concept and what people think is so wrong because it feels weird is just wrong. It's just wrong. It doesn't apply. I'll give you another example, and then we'll talk about why this is really, really important. Okay, high reliability point-to-point soldering requires mechanical attachment. Also, there is no acid in rosin core solder. Half of soldering is cleanliness. Difficult joints may well need flux, like rosin flux. So, everybody wants me to use rosin core solder, or they want me to use flux. Apparently, my soldering is not good enough because I don't use flux. And it's not just me. They encourage people oftentimes in the soldering videos to use flux. This comes from plumbing, because you use flux in plumbing. And the engineering reason for not using flux in soldering a guitar is very, very important. So we'll get to that in a second. The first thing is the mechanical joint. So what they're talking about is if I take an eyelet and I put Make your jokes. It's fine. If you put the wire into the hole and then you solder it, versus putting it into the hole, hooking it over, and then soldering it. Okay. The reason I don't hook it over and solder it is because there's two reasons. One, the solder joint is strong enough. I'm actually going to make a short today where we take a pot and we put two wires, one on either side, in the pot. We solder it, and then me and Brianna are going to actually tug of war and pull it apart. And I'm going to show you what fails. The pot will break before the solder joint will fail. We're going to make a short for YouTube, for the other channel to do this. So you don't need to do it. A solder joint is strong enough to be reliable in a guitar. I don't know anybody who's yanking on a guitar that hard, right? You'll see when we do the short on the other channel how crazy it is. It's very strong. Okay, so that's kind of an easy one. The second reason, A, you don't need it, and B, the second reason, number two, mechanical joints are bad, is because it makes the guitar almost impossible to service in the future. So if you have a pot failure, then chances are you're going to have to cut that wire. So that also means you're going to have to replace the wire. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you're in the moment, so especially if you're a gigging musician, you don't want this, right? You want something that can be done quickly. And you don't want to replace parts that you don't need to replace. So if you do all this mechanical joint stuff and tangle everything up, you're going to have to cut wires. You're going to have to cut things to get them out of the guitar. It just makes it very not serviceable. So those are practical things, not necessarily engineering things. Let's talk about the acid thing. Flux, like plumbing flux, has acid in it. Okay. The problem is that it remains corrosive after you use it. So the flux, the acid flux that people are talking about, is not made for electronics. It's not. 100% it's not. Okay. It is made for higher bulk flame based soldering or brazing. So look, when you sweat a pipe, which we don't do anymore, but when you sweat a pipe in a wall, that solder joint, that acid remains active after you solder it. This can be seen by looking at a copper pipe years later, and you will see, because of condensation, you will see blue running down away from that. You'll also see darkening on either side of the solder joint. You know how copper is like bright copper, where this is copper and it's turned brown because it started to corrode over time. So what you'll see this is a pen that's made out of copper. So what you'll see shiny here, and then dark where the joint is because the corrosion has continued. You do not want that in a guitar. That's very bad because we're dealing with much smaller components, and we're also dealing with much smaller joints. And so if you introduce corrosion there and you introduce it into the adjacent components, like a pot, you will have failure. Okay. Now the claim that you do not have solder acid, there is no acid in rosin, is actually incorrect. It's called, and I knew that was true, but I had to actually look up the name because I could not remember. It's called abiotic acid. I think that's how you say it. But the design of it in rosin core solder, it's like tree sap. But basically what it is designed to do is to be acidic under heat, so that when you heat the solder up, it becomes active. And then when the solder cools down, it becomes inert. This causes the corrosion that happens by the solder to only act at the point of the solder to remove oxidation. But then once it gets cool, it does not further oxidize, damaging the part on into the future. So This is why these choices are made. This is what this stuff is for. So this is why I get that people have ideas. I get it. Man, just be cool, right? Like, and I know this was a little bit longer and a little bit technical, but when you're looking at stuff, remember that there are, and I'm not talking when you're watching my stuff. I'm talking when you're watching stuff in general. That there is a guy somewhere in a white suit, with a pocket protector and some thick glasses, doing some Adderall, uh, designing some stuff. And he's, pretty smart guy. And he's engineered some stuff. And this is why it is the way it is. The same thing came up in the knife world last week. There was some people testing some steel and thinking that the carbides were in the wrong place and blah, blah, blah. And what it really came down to was that there was some relief cuts put in some steel where they shouldn't have been put. And so the knives broke. They were designed incorrectly. But the metallurgist who designed the steel had to explain that. Because people had a thing in their head, that this was supposed to be the result. It just wasn't from an engineering standpoint. So electronics is pretty simple if you let it be. If you inject a bunch of myths into it, it gets more complicated. It's just like religion at that point. You inject a bunch of stuff into it that doesn't belong, and therefore then it becomes weird, right? The weirder it gets, okay? Then next thing you know, there's a documentary about you on Netflix. It's the same thing with this stuff. If you just let the engineering be what it is, it will be much simpler. You have a lot less to worry about, and you won't be looked at as a weirdo on Netflix or in the comment section. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you in the next one.